anything she wants.
Do you have a particular watch in mind?
Japanese.
Swiss.
Too expensive.
Ah, Swiss. The Bulva Swiss collection.
Gorgeous.
With quartz, the most accurate movement money can buy, and the price is only $125.
Like I said, anything she wants.
Bulva, the Swiss watch without the Swiss price.
Available at Lawson's Jewelers.
Okay. Who's heard of the Quartz Crisis? Who was a teenager during the Quartz Crisis? It was a very interesting time. I'll start off with a story before we get into the presentation. I became a watchmaker during the Quartz Crisis, which is a very interesting time to have become a watchmaker, but especially studying in Switzerland. So I started my studies in London and then finished them off in Switzerland. And part of the training at that time through WASTEP was actually going to different factories and doing field trips and seeing what was going on, and then also going into ITA and seeing their production facility. Now, at that time, they weren't really opening up their production facilities to many people, but they did for us because it was a Swiss school and we got to go in and see. And I was blown away by what I saw because it was something that I had never seen or could even have imagined as a young watchmaker. And all of what I saw there at that point was because of the Quartz Crisis. Now, I guess there's two sides to this. Some people can actually see this as a crisis. Some people will actually see it as an evolution or even a revolution, right? Whichever side you're on, you'll still see the same things. You're just looking at it differently. And that is the fact that quartz watches became predominant. During the presentation, we'll sort of see why that happened and what it actually meant. There's a bit of a focus during this presentation actually on what it actually meant to the Swiss, because for them, it was a completely different experience than it was for the Japanese. And so I hope that I'll get this across during this presentation. The presentation isn't about quartz watches and how they work. It's just assuming that there's a basic knowledge of the fact that there's a difference between quartz watches and mechanical watches. So that aside. It isn't about, ultimately it isn't about, did Switzerland mess up? Because they didn't. Or at least we'll see, and we'll discuss this at the end, did they mess up? Could it have been any different for what was going on? Well, I can tell you right at the very beginning is that this was like the space race. Many companies, not just companies in Japan, but companies in Switzerland were working towards some form of electronic watch because that was the future, as they saw it. The downside is what you've grown to know from the Swiss side as the crisis, because it attacked their economy greatly. This isn't the first time things like this have happened, right? Where technology has come along and made a massive disruption. Many of you are photographers. Many of you have a smartphone, and perhaps the smartphone has taken away from your camera, right? There's a lot of parallels to be seen here, going from analog to digital. And I think this presentation will really sort of highlight that. The end result, though, is that you've got something on your wrist. Today, I wore my Formula 1 as a quartz watch, because I think it makes sense to do that today. It's great. Mary thinks it's too small for my wrist, but no.
At Seiko, great technology inspires great design. Steel rods and gleaming hinges for a supple bracelet watch. Gold tone on gray tone for the definitive strap watch. A second hand on her elegant dress watch. Water resistant too, very today. One diamond and a rich two-tone setting, very tonight. Man invented time, Seiko perfected it.
Disruption, electromechanical watches. Now, electromechanical watches started long before the Quartz Crisis. Companies were dying to go down that path, just like you were seeing the Jetsons as a cartoon. Space was the new frontier. As we got into the late 60s, you saw space everywhere, time everywhere. There was Doctor Who, there was Star Trek. There were communicators that people could never even imagine. So there was a consciousness there to actually go beyond what was currently known, especially for mechanical watchmaking. The Japanese understood electronics, after all, but this was massive on the entire global watch industry as to what they would do. Electromechanical watches started in the 50s. Very, very different to what you would consider as quartz watches today. They were mostly mechanical. They even had a swinging balance. That balance was kept swinging by magnets. Okay? Not all that different to what later became quartz watches and a stator motor. Very simple. Magnet on the balance, magnet where the balance is passing through, and that was attracting and repelling, so giving the balance impulse. They were not very accurate. Every once in a while I see them here, but they're masterpieces to actually see that people are actually working on that stuff. I'm going to jump to 1969, Christmas Day. This was very significant. This was really significant because the Seiko landed on the moon first, if you think of it like a space race. They got to market first with their Astron. Not only did they get to market first with their Astron plus or minus 5 seconds per month. Now I want to put this into perspective. This ain't no cheap quartz watch, right? The amount of R&D that went into this thing was crazy to get it to this point. It was 450,000 Japanese yen. 450,000 Japanese yen in 1969. That was the price of a compact car. Who was buying this, right? Maybe the same kind of people that would be buying Rolexes or other high-end brands. But to actually go after that, that wasn't frivolous spending in any way whatsoever. So it's hard to believe. But what was even more crazy was plus to minus 5 seconds a month. on average, anyone, just call out to me what you think an average modern quartz watch, reasonably good quartz watch, will do for timekeeping per month. Less than 10, yeah. Typically around a second to 3 seconds, depending on whether it's a budget quartz or a nice quartz, thermocompensated quartz, right? Because all those things, if you've been to some of the other talks, you'll see that heat and cold has an effect on timekeeping, even with quartz watches. So this was stunning. So this begs the question, when it comes down to the Swiss, were they slow to adapt? Were they slow to change? I don't know, but we'll start with it. Let's see. Was there an innovation gap? That's a good place to start with this, right? Because did the Swiss do something wrong, right? Was their technology not quite there? I don't know. The Swiss were most certainly focused on traditional watchmaking. I mean, their whole industry was built up on traditional watchmaking. The Japanese, on the other hand, were very much electronics focused, right? So they already had this cluster of industries on a very small island to actually bring forth something very different. Where some companies were making advances in cutting quartz crystals to act as the resonator for a quartz. That was incredible, right? They were doing all of that. They had the electronics and the production down. The Swiss, well, I don't think the Swiss were really making that much in the way of TVs or any other electronics at that time. It isn't as if the Swiss were idling here. So if you look at this, they had already announced a watch, right? I mean, yes, Seiko got there first, but a few months later, they actually came out with something, which was incredible. And of course, because of the conglomerates and the groups that were working on this quartz side of it, they put that into an Omega, which was a big brand at that time. The two countries were neck and neck. Obviously, for Seiko to drop an incredible quartz watch, Christmas Day 1969, and 4 months later, the Swiss bring out something with Omega. The Swiss weren't slouching, that's for sure. So we can't actually say that, you know, that they were not focused on it. They were, but not everyone in Switzerland. Only a small group. So why? Here we go. Japan had made significant strides in the electronics, but also, more importantly, Japan was on the radar for Switzerland because for many years prior to the Astron, they were competing in Swiss chronometry contests and ended up actually beating the Swiss many times in those chronometry contests with mechanical watches. So the Japanese were very much concentrated on high precision timing. They wanted to beat the Swiss, or at least they wanted to show the Swiss that they could be at least as good as them, right? So this was it. I couldn't say for sure whether it was just this thing, well, we've got to go and beat the Swiss, but there certainly was this animosity. At that time, Japanese delegates were not allowed to go into any of the Swiss watchmaking factories. They were turned away at the door. Like, no, sorry, you're not coming in. You're not seeing what we're doing. Nothing to see here. Go away, right? But so maybe there was a little bit of animosity there. You just don't know, right? So there, a game of noughts and crosses at this point. As you know, noughts and crosses, well, it's pretty equal. So for decades, Switzerland had dominated the global market watchmaking industry with its expertise in mechanical watches. Everyone knew, hey, if you want a good watch, get a Swiss watch, right? That was the thing. Oh, it's Swiss, you know? Even back in the 70s, 60s, 50s, Swiss. Oh yeah, Swiss. Swiss, American, maybe even, right? Yeah, this is it. The Swiss are a proud people. They were very, very proud of their achievements and their craftsmanship. This was something very, very different to the Japanese, in a sense. Japanese liked production, right? They were very, very, very good at production. They had it all organized. The Swiss were much more focused on not so much production, but just making really nice watches, right? That everybody could go, yeah, it's Swiss. Yeah, it's Swiss. Certainly the Swiss underestimated the public's desire for highly accurate watches. I think that many people even today underestimate that desire, right? Some people, if you came to the chronometry talk that I did, right, will realize what it actually takes to actually make a highly accurate mechanical watch. With a quartz watch, it's not so difficult. It's all down to the quartz resonator, how fast the quartz resonator can resonate accurately, right? To then what the output is, and that will affect the accuracy of the output. The Swiss were just, you know, there was a group of Swiss that were focused on electronic watches, but much of the industry wasn't. They were still interested in beautifully finished watches, right? So this is an amazing stat. So taken, you know, the year after the release of the Astron, this is what started to happen. 1,600 brands or watch producing companies fell to 600 by 1983 from 1970. This was crazy. This was absolutely crazy. So you can see that perhaps even though the Swiss weren't sitting and idling and doing nothing, it had an effect because the group consciousness for the industry at that time was just still mechanical watches. We're going to do mechanical watches. So what ended up happening ultimately was that production. The Astron was crazy at that price, but it didn't take them very long at that time from 69 going through to the early 80s to sort out their production to be able to mass produce quartz watches quickly, right? Because that's what Japan could do. That's what Japan did best. And I think that is what left Switzerland in the rearview mirror amongst the dust, right? But did it? So, resistance to change. Kodak. I mean, Kodak made film, right? Kodak made cameras. There was even a slogan. The slogan was, "Oh, it's a Kodak moment," right? There it is. Take it down, get it printed, put it in your album. Look at that, that's my holiday photos right there. Kodak loved film. Why did Kodak love film? Kodak loved film because it was a cash cow. It was a consumable. It was a complete industry to itself, right? And they dominated it completely. Did you know that Kodak were one of the first companies to actually bring out a commercial sensor for professional photographers for a camera to go digital? It was like 1 megapixel. I know it seems crazy now, but it was like incredible then, right? And they did that with Nikon. They were on the bleeding edge. They were making sensors. But wait, they dumped it. They dumped the technology because there were factions within the company that did not want that cash cow decimated. This is film. This is never going to go anywhere with the digital stuff. It's nowhere near what film can produce. No, you're not messing with the film. What ends up happening? Kodak was left in the dust because, especially with companies like Fuji right there, right, took over, completely took over. Nikon took over, but Kodak had a chance. So this is a little bit of anecdotal evidence that no matter what, you don't know what the future's gonna bring, but you've got to go with something. Kodak made the wrong choice. So when it came down to the Swiss, they had historical successes, craftsmanship and heritage, economic dependence. There was a perceived threat to their luxury status. There's the film as well, right? The Kodak side of the film. We've got luxury watches. Why would we produce anything less than that, right? That's not us, that's not, hey, it's Swiss, right? The Swiss, I don't know, are there any Swiss in here? The Swiss are really good at making chocolate, at making cheese, at making watches. But they're also world leaders in tunneling, right? There's mountains all around them. Those mountains, they may look solid, but there's Swiss cheese inside because that's what the Swiss do. Their military infrastructure is all in the mountains, buried in the mountains, right? And they're very conservative. They have a bit of tunnel vision, right? They don't like change. They don't. When I was at school in Switzerland in '88, they didn't even like foreigners, let alone a foreigner with a different color skin, right? So that gives you an idea of the Swiss mentality at that time, right? They were superior in their mind, and they went like this. They just went around like this. They were just like, oh yeah, okay, who would want one of these quartz things? But certain factions within the industry realized, hey, they had to change. They would be lost. So this is when there was a revolution. This is where certain groups actually started to think.
You were miles apart when it began. At times, the distance between you seemed insurmountable. But with the dawn came agreement, and a partnership was born. For this and all your significant moments, Omega.
For the Omega you want, visit Samuel's Jewelers.
They put together a strategy to actually come up with something that could then compete with the Japanese. They saw it as an attack. Well, you just saw the stats, right? I mean, the companies had been decimated, going from 1600s to 600 in a short period of time. There was not a Swiss company that was unaffected by this situation. Many of the companies that you know now, they're only around because of a strategy. So many of the popular Swiss brands that we know today failed or were on the brink of demise. It's only in the last 10 years that perhaps even some of them have come back from it, right? Angelus. There's an incredible brand, famous for their chronographs, right? Very separate from Valjoux, right? The chronograph maker. They died because of it. They were one of the 1,000 companies that just went pop. But now they're back. But that's just one. Omega. Omega was on its knees. Longines was on its knees. Tissot was on its knees, right? Because they didn't have that crazy production mentality, right? We're producing beautiful Swiss watches that everybody wants still, right? People did, but they saw something different. They knew that there was something out there that was going to be technology. It's going to be technology on the wrist. Look at the adoption rate of the Apple Watch, right? I mean, we've gone from this to putting that into that space, right? And everybody that wears a watch like that, I mean, look how many people. It's ridiculous. Everyone thought that was going to kill the Swiss watch industry, but it didn't. Because they'd learned, right? They had learned from this exercise. Okay. So to address these challenges, this is the strategy. Swiss watchmaking groups were formed in the early 1980s. And now this is a bit of a history lesson in how the Swatch group came to be. Okay? So, ASUAG. Anyone want to pronounce that? Allgemeine Schweizerische Uhrenindustrie. So, in Switzerland, there's many languages. German, French, Italian, Romansh, right? So there's a deep divide in Switzerland, just like there is in Canada. You go into one place and you're speaking French. You go into the other place and you're speaking English, right? Same there, but you got German as well, and Italian, in a very, very tiny place. So one faction, certainly Swiss-German. The other side, the Société Suisse pour l'Industrie Horlogerie. These groups aimed at consolidating various watchmaking companies. So this was already then the start of a crazy consolidation, right? what does consolidation do? Especially when you've got an industry of consolidation, right? What does it do? People start talking to each other. They have to, right? You may have competition within your industry within Switzerland, but now all of a sudden, hey, if there's no industry, you're dead. So you might as well start helping each other out. So the consolidation enabled sharing of technology. Research and development capabilities as well came along with that as a nice, tidy little package. Manufacturing facilities, consolidating that. All of a sudden now they're seeing, wow, the Japanese certainly know how to produce, right? We've seen this throughout time. Look at Japanese car companies, but not just at the brands, but how they actually produce cars, right? Lean manufacturing came from Japan. Well, technically it didn't. It kind of started with Henry Ford, but the Japanese went there, saw it, and just went, wow, this is us. And they refined it. They made it their own, and it was incredible. Now it's taught worldwide, right? Not just in manufacturing, but management, right? So this is what the Japanese are really good at. Let's go back to that. So the key thing there was a unified umbrella to streamline the operations. A unified umbrella. So that was just like, we're all working together now, okay? This is what we're doing. So they pooled the manufacturing, they pooled their expertise, and they pooled their intellectual property. Brilliant. That worked. Then it went further. The two of them decided to merge into one, because that made sense. Not just talking to each other, but now getting married, right? So that was SMH. Now, when I started watchmaking, there was no Swatch group. It was SMH. So I always knew it as SMH, and I catch myself referring to it as SMH, right? Because that's what it was. It's incredible. So these two groups come together, SMH, that's it. (1978). Let's go back. The Christmas gift to the Swiss, Christmas Day, 1969, Seiko Astron. It took from 1969 to 1978, almost 10 years, for them to sort that stuff out, to get manufacturing going, so they could actually develop and manufacture en masse. So this is how disruptive this whole thing was for the Swiss, right? And the world. But the Swiss were going to do it in a very Swiss way, right? Because they had to shine. They really did, right? So the birth of the Swatch concept by Nick Hayek. Okay, so the Hayek family is Swatch. For those of you that don't know Nick Hayek, he was a visionary, right? He was an entrepreneur. So typically watchmakers are not necessarily entrepreneurs, only a small portion of them. Many watchmakers will like their jobs. They like coming into work in the morning and having their routine and working on a watch and working on multiple watches and then leaving at the end of the day and then coming back in the next day and doing that. So it took a businessman, ultimately, to actually pull all this stuff together in the form of Nick Hayek when it came down to the Swatch watch. So he started that in 1978. You're going to see in a minute what it is, but before I show the slide, does anyone know when the first Swatch watch was released? Guess. Give me a guess.
I don't know because I don't have the slide for you yesterday.
Come on, someone give me a date. Yeah? Right on. That was exactly it. Now, if you can find a Swatch watch from 1983, yeah, that in itself is incredible because it's been kept. And I'll explain why in a minute. So the comeback was in 1983. I started watchmaking in 1985, right? So as I was a young teenager, I started to see Swatch. I started also to see Japanese watches and understand Japanese watches, Seiko, the latest things. Seiko in the Bond movies and everything else, because that was the time where things started to change in the movies, right? For Bond, we're going from Rolex to Seiko.
From Seiko comes the world's first ever TV watch. And in the movie Octopussy, James Bond is never without it. A technological breakthrough in the classic 007 tradition. With a clear liquid crystal display screen. For the man who does everything with style. Seiko Quartz, the future never looked so good.
ジェームズ・ボンド愛用のセイコーデジタルに新製品登場。アラーム機能と8桁計算機搭載。スーパービジネスマンにセイコーチェックメイト。
What Nick did was he created an assembly line. And it didn't involve a lot of people. It was automated. So you remember when I said that when I went to Switzerland in '88 and I saw what was going on there, and my mind was blown, especially when I went to ITA, right? The first thing they showed us, we walked into the building, and I remember it so clearly to this day, behind glass, there was this automated assembly of watches happening. Swatch wanted to make something cool. Nick thought, this is a young person's watch. What was happening in the 80s? New wave, right? Duran Duran. If you've heard that band, maybe, right? You've got Depeche Mode. All this incredible music. You've got big hair, bright colors, everything everywhere. And Nick Hayek saw that. And he's like, well, how can we get watches to these people? Because this is a craze, right? We better be on this, right? So they'd gone through the strange 70s, right? With long hair and everything else, looking kind of dingy in a way, all dark brown colors and stuff like that, just to going into the 80s where there was life, there was vibrancy. And that is what Nick Hayek caught in the watch by its colors. That's what he caught when it came down to affordability, because they were not that expensive. Anyone could afford to get a Swatch. Mary, you had a Swatch. Yeah, there you go. Who else had a Swatch? Who else has a Swatch? Wow, incredible, right? At some point, we've all had Swatches. I have, and I still have it. one of those Swatch wall clocks. One of the first Swatch wall clocks. I remember getting it in like 88, 85, somewhere between 85 and 88. Hanging up on the wall, had this big strap, and it was like this round. It was so cool. Nick Hayek was a marketer. He knew how to get this stuff out there, and he surrounded himself by people that wanted to do that, and it was incredible. And it won. It worked. It worked. And then all of a sudden, all these other companies started to build back up again. Omega started to come back, right? Longines, all in different ways, Breitling, but so many companies didn't. The thing is though, when you look at it, this is where there was this massive division between what Seiko was putting out there when it came down to quartz watches, and then what the Swiss were doing. Swiss were doing Swatch. Everyone knew Swatch for Swiss as a quartz watch. Seiko was Seiko. By comparison, they were extremely different in the way of their look. One was far more conservative than the other, right? But they're all after the same goal, quartz watches, because they're accurate. Now, here we go, the sneak attack. What about these prestige brands? Patek Philippe, Piaget, Rolex. What about them? What do you think they thought of all this? Well, I can tell you that all of those companies were affected in some way. No one was left untouched. In 1977, that's when Rolex released the Oyster Quartz. This, I have to say, was amazing. 1977 to 2000. And what did Rolex do? They did what Rolex do. Strong marketing. Ultimately, people knew them as being that prestige tool watch company, right? And look, there they are, back up on a mountain. Reinhold Messner. I mean, that world record is long gone now. But yes, Rolex is on the top of a mountain. Not Smith's. So they were happy. But that watch was incredible. The 5035, 5055 caliber. The 5055 caliber is the day date. So there was a quartz day date, or president. That is 3/4 mechanical, my friends. They did it in Rolex's way. They made it beefy, they made it strong. You hear that thing tick, you can hear it across the room. Very much like a Swatch. Does anybody know why Swatch watches tick so loud? Because they made the motors hugely strong. Why did they make the motors hugely strong? Because you couldn't repair them. You couldn't open them. You had a port to change the battery. You had a plastic crystal, but if that thing died, that's it. Done. Even with watches today, they're a disposable watch. That was built to last too. The only thing that's missing from that, from any other Rolex watch, is a balance, that's all. An incredible gear train. Any of you that are interested in this and have ever thought about buying a Rolex Quartz, dig into it because it's very cool. It's a very cool watch. And oh yeah, look at that. Patek Philippe actually made quartz watches, but do you think they put quartz on the dial? No. No, sir, they weren't going to do that. Have a look at that picture on the right-hand side. What do you see? A Patek Philippe with a Seiko battery in it. I just love that, yeah. But they did it too, because they had to. They had to produce something where it showed that they were on trend, right? That they were not being left behind.
Swatch. Always different, always new. Fashionable. Water resistant. Shock resistant. Swiss made. Swatch, the new wave in Swiss watches.
This is the 80s. This is Nick Hayek, right? Who wouldn't want this at that time, right? It was full of life. Seiko, when they launched the Astron, their slogan was, "One day, all watches will be made this way." That was a very profound statement from them, very serious, right? And on any of their ads from that period, like go hunt them on YouTube or whatever, you'll see always that very deep voice, almost samurai-esque, right? Someday, all watches will be made this way.
From the world leader in quartz technology comes a new exclusive elegance. Elegance born of advanced technology. This is the special quality of Seiko. Someday all watches will be made this way.
Just hear it, and it was just like, yeah, we're winning this battle. But that was it. The Swiss lifted up. They'd been down in the doldrums. They needed something that could do that, and that was it. But now look at what's actually happened. After all of this, right, you've got a Swiss industry which is friendly unto itself, right? You've got a Japanese industry which is going strong. You've got quartz watches out there made by Japanese manufacturers, supplying brands like Fossil, Michael Kors, right? Look how popular diesel is, right? Fashion watches and everything else. Why? Because they can be made with inexpensive movements, right? For most companies that are producing quartz watches, they're not servicing the watches anymore. They're just replacing the movements because the price of the movement is so low that it doesn't make sense. The time when you would need to service a watch would be somewhere between 8 and 12 years old of that watch, and you can still get that exact same movement to be able to take one out, put a new one back in, and you're going to get another potentially 12 years out of that watch. It's incredible. I was shocked. My dad had jewelry stores in the UK. I was shocked at how many people would come to him and say, "Can you take this mechanical movement out of here and put a quartz watch in it, quartz movement in it?" Right? Quartz conversions were the norm, kind of like dial refinishing, right? And case polishing, right? All things I've spoken about over the last few months, right? It's incredible how disruptive quartz has been on the entire industry. But now, look at what's happened since the pandemic. It took a pandemic to make us a bit more of a swing, right? Back to mechanical watches. Look at what has happened to the camera industry and film. Film's making a bit of a comeback, right? More and more people want that analog side to it because it's different, right? And these are trends that will keep revolving. There'll be new things. Should we fear AI, right? Or is it just going to lead to something better? Who knows? So the thing here, for the last few minutes, this is what I want you to meet each other. I want you guys to actually start a conversation with yourselves, right? And talk about this. Who actually came out on top? That's a really good topic starter. And which technology is prevailing? Would you wear a quartz watch? Right? If Bremont came out with a quartz watch, oh, I just stepped on that landmine. Oh dear. Would you wear a quartz Bremont? Would you wear one of the quartz marathon watches? CWC. Talk about it. Talk about it. I want to talk about it. Let's do it. Who's got a quartz? There you go. You like it? Yeah. I got a quartz too. How many of you had LCD watches? I had one. Well, I had a few actually from the late 70s when Seiko brought out their first stopwatch, LCD stopwatch. Who remembers the red LEDs? What they cool? I remember being a kid just I wore the battery out so much because I just kept pressing the button. I just wanted to see the light come up, and the LED font, if you can call it that, just very angular. It was so spacey. It was incredible. So who do you think came out on top here? Did the Swiss? Do you think the Swiss are doing a better job than Japan is for quartz watches right now? I saw a Citizen watch that's accurate to within a second a year. Like, that's crazy, right? That's a new movement of theirs. But I think you're right. I think there is balance now. Hey, when you want to go away and travel somewhere, you don't necessarily want to take a nice watch with you because there's always a fear that someone might spot it and then you may be a target, perhaps, right? Sad, but you can always put on a cool quartz watch that will fly completely under the radar in most places, right? In most instances. Zinn make a quartz watch, right? And they've just brought it out in the U50 size as the hydro, so it's oil filled, right? That's incredible, right? In a company that only typically makes mechanical watches, they can now have a balance with one watch for a specific purpose. So Quartz has actually opened this up for very unique situations, even for companies where they can't necessarily do that. Put a mechanical watch into an all-oil environment, right? So I think, yeah, I think there is balance now, and I think that companies like fashion companies wouldn't exist without that. Asian tourbillon. Like, you know, it makes you think, why is a Swiss tourbillon so much money when it can be made inexpensively? Did you know that Nomos actually has a patent for a tourbillon, but they've never made it yet. Will they one day? I don't know. Will they make it affordable? Probably more so than other European tourbillons, but nowhere near as price effective as Asian tourbillons. Competition is always good. What happened to the Swiss, I think, was incredible because it pulled down the silos. They started talking, they started working together and moving forward, right? And I think that any time that we can do that, it's great. It's good for the industry, it's good for ourselves, right? Anytime we can knock down silos and be talking. So that's it. That's all I've got to say. You guys are more than welcome to stay and chat and hang out for a bit. We're going to carry on with our normal stuff, but treat this as a meetup if you want to. And thank you honestly very much for coming down and listening this morning. I hope that this has been interesting for you. I hope that it's been insightful. And I always put it out there that if ever you've got an idea for a talk, please let me know. And, you know, I'll start to put some different things together for you. But, you know, this is about you guys, and thank you very much for coming down today. Yeah, you're very welcome. Hello everyone, this is Jason, and I want to thank you for being with us today listening to the Roldorf Cafe Podcast. You can hear more of our shows and when they're released on Instagram and our website. We cover many topics about watches, the industry, and the brands we're most passionate about. You can find the Roldorf shop at 307 West Cordova in Gastown in Vancouver, and we'd be delighted to welcome you and talk watches. Visit our website for more information at roldorf.co.